Reserve. The root of all our evil, it begins with the Federal Reserve. Hey, yeah, well, let's go back in time when everybody was so proud of America.
I'm Thomas Salmons. This is year 0. Today, Patrick MacFarlane joins me. I had Patrick on just to have a nice, long conversation, which is what you get. You get about 2 hours of me and Patrick talking about Russia, China, Libertarian Party, politics, the culture war, groomers, teachers, education, yada, yada, yada. And we had a really good conversation. I really enjoyed talking to Patrick, as always. And Boogie is attacking me. I didn't close my door before I started recording this intro, so I have Boogie all up on me. Anyway, so it was a lot of fun, and I'm sure you'll enjoy it. Patrick's always a lot of fun to talk to. RyanBunting.com. For all of your graphic design needs, go to RyanBunting.com. Some people would accuse Ryan Bunting of being a racist, but I think he's a statistics enthusiast. So go to RyanBunting.com for all of your graphic design and statistics enthusiasm needs. That's RyanBunting.com. Or also Autonomy Virtual. But that's not near as fun as RyanBunting.com, which is where you will find a great libertarian, a great anarcho-capitalist, and a great graphic designer who happens to be a statistics enthusiast. RyanBunting.com. LibertarianInstitute.org is where you can find my work, obviously. Patrick MacFarlane, Keith Knight, Kyle Anzalone, Scott Horton, Kim Robinson, Connor Freeman. I'm sorry, Boogie is just chewing the shit out of me. But go to libertarianinstitute.org. We got a lot of great podcasts, a lot of good writers. It's a pleasure being involved with libertarianinstitute.org. So go to libertarianinstitute.org. And thank you, Tom Burton, for the music. Enjoy the show. I'm here with the future Pulitzer Prize winner from the Libertarian Institute and Zero Hedge, Patrick MacFarlane. What's going on, dude?
Hey, thanks for having me out, dude.
I had to, given the Pulitzers just came out.
Yeah. Well, you're selling me pretty high here.
Yeah, you're doing great. You're doing great.
Thanks, man.
Your articles are much more important than anything these prize winners got for Black Lives Matter or January 6th writing.
Well, I'll tell you what, I certainly have fun writing them. I always wanted to be a writer, Tommy. Wanting to be a lawyer came second.
Yeah. I always wanted to be a writer too, and I never chose second, so I ended up being a truck driver.
I've read your work, Tommy. You have amazing prose. You really
I gotta take the time to sit down and finish. I do. I'm too hard on myself when it comes to it, and I'm like, nope, it's not ready yet.
Yeah.
And so it's never ready yet.
Yeah.
You know? So it's
no, I get you.
A lot of times what you see like published at the Institute is my first draft. Because I'm like, I'm not even going to look at it again. I'm just going to send it to Scott.
Yeah.
You know, and then I let him send it back to me and tell me what he thinks it needs, if he ever does that. Sometimes he doesn't even send it back. And I'm like, shit, is he ignoring me? Like, what's going on? Was it that bad? But so
I have a lot of trust in Scott, and I have a lot of trust in Kyle, you know, too. And I know that if something is whack, they're going to tell me. And so there's a lot of trust there.
Yeah. Yeah. There's only been like 1 or 2 articles that got published without Scott ever sending it back to me. He just sent it over to Hunter, and Hunter was like, yep, it's going up. And it's like, okay.
Click.
So, yeah. So, but for the most part, Scott will look at it and he'll be like, all right, I'd like to see some more of this in here, or some, you know, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but I know he's going to be honest with me, and I know he's not coming from a bad place. Yeah. It's like, I was talking to the other day about, I send a lot of times my short stories, I'll send to my dad because I know my dad's going to tell me, from someone who reads a lot of fiction, he's going to be like, no, I'm looking for this. So try to incorporate some more of this in there. So I'll do that. But yeah, well, I'm very hard on myself when it comes to my writing. So.
Yeah, no, same dude, same. And I gotta be fair because the first person I think at the Institute to be run on Zero Hedge was Kyle. And then my work went up, and then very shortly thereafter, Connor Freeman had his pieces one piece so far published. But I think it's going to be a regular thing now. I think that the Institute is on their list. Whoever compiles the articles there.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I didn't even know about Kyle or Connor Freeman.
I guess Kyle was run at the.
They're not as good at marketing as you are.
Well, Kyle was run at the Ron Paul Institute too. He had a piece run there, and if you go on the page, he's on the list now of the contributors.
Kyle's killing it, man. Kyle's awesome.
Yeah,
Kyle's awesome.
Kyle, Will, and Connor, and Keith, and you. I mean, I gotta applaud everybody. If this is a self-congratulatory circle jerk, no. Well, we just I don't know. I have a lot of pride, in my brothers. You guys are my brothers, and we're in this together. And when I see all of us doing good work, it really inspires me to step my game up. So
right, yeah. But I want to talk to you about this article about Adam Kinzinger. Like, I know the name, but I don't know much about the guy. So can you give me a little bit of background on the guy, who he is, where he came from? Yeah,
well, he's a fib. That's Wisconsin slang for you. Fib stands for fucking Illinois bastard.
Well, it's a lot more creative than rhino, so.
He is a rhino too. So he's a House rep from, I think, the 13th district in Illinois. And he's been in the House since 2010. And one thing that really, I don't know, made me think I have to do a piece on him was that either Kyle or Dave DeCamp wrote up a thing about how Kinzinger was introduced a new AUMF in the House. And thankfully it's not getting a lot of support. So I don't think it's going to pass. And Dave did another piece on how it's not getting support too. But it was really alarming because essentially it would give Biden the clearance to fight a boots on the ground war in Ukraine if Ukraine uses WMDs, either chemical, biological weapons.
If Russia does, or if Ukraine does?
If Russia does, sorry.
Okay.
If Russia uses chemical, biological, or nuclear weapons, yeah. Right. And so it would give Biden the clearance to go ahead and use kinetic U.S. forces, get them involved kinetically.
Yeah.
And it was really alarming to me. There's a parallel that Kyle made saying in the lead up to Iraq, the war in Iraq in 2002, Joe Biden announced his support for the new AUMF, saying that it wouldn't open the door to war. And then, soon after that, Bush uses it to invade Iraq. Right. So I wanted to kind of do a dive on Adam Kinzinger, and I found that he's been behind a lot of this. He co-authored the Stability and Democracy for Ukraine Act on September 21st, 2016. And this was an act basically that said the U.S. couldn't take sanctions off of Russia unless Crimea was returned to Ukraine. And so essentially this closes the door on diplomacy between the United States and Russia. And of course that has this snowballing effect leading directly to where we are right now.
And that was passed into law?
It was, yeah.
Okay.
So
is this why is something like that why we're not trying to stop the war, and why they're coming out with these statements that it's better to just continue it and bleed Russia dry type?
Yeah, and I think, certainly you can't see into the hearts of men, but we have clues to try and figure out what is in their hearts. And if you're viewing our Ukraine policy in the lens of where we are now, with the hindsight, right, of knowing where we're at now, knowing that there are forces in Washington that would like to see a prolonged insurgency in Ukraine. We're talking maybe multiple years, maybe 5 years, maybe a decade, another Afghanistan. This is right out of Zbigniew Brzezinski's playbook here with Afghanistan in the 80s.
Yeah.
So if you're looking backwards at it and thinking about noticing all those signs, I mean, it certainly seems like Kinzinger and his ilk, maybe his thought controllers at the neoconservative think tanks, are looking to create this situation.
Yeah, Brzezinski wrote a lot about the former Soviet Union too. Yeah, I mean, it was the Soviet Union at the time when he wrote the Grand Chessboard, and he was writing a lot about Azerbaijan and was it Kazakhstan? Is it Uzbekistan's up there? Ukraine?
You know, and I was just reading. I was just reading Patrick Wood's book, Technocracy. On technocracy, he was
the hard road to
World Order. World Order or something. Yeah, and let's see.
That's a good one.
Bring it up because he was just on with Whitney Webb, and they were talking about it. Technocracy Rising, and he's talking about how the Trojan horse to the New World Order, or something like that. He was talking a lot about how Zbigniew Brzezinski was involved in recruiting Jimmy Carter, and you know all of the ideas behind Jimmy Carter and in the foreign policy with like the New World Order kind of stuff, getting into that.
Right. I read, I just got done with The Next Million Years by Charles Galton Darwin, which was written in, I think, the 50s. I think it was written in the 50s. And I think about like some of the things that he lays out there. And some of the things that we're seeing, I'm reading this book right now by Parag Khanna called Connectography. So I'm really kind of interested in this kind of global network that they're trying to set up and what it is. I told Pete the other day when I was recording with him that it seems like what we're dealing with is... Basically, we're dealing with like conservative globalists and progressive globalists, right? So you got your post-World War II Brzezinski types, Soros, Hans-Jörg Wyss kind of billionaires that are pumping money into USAID and these kind of traditional systems. But then you have your Elon Musk, and I think a microcosm of this is watching the kind of Elon Musk, Bill Gates drama that's gone on the last few days. That you kind of have this idea of the more technocratic ideas, more along the lines of Brave New World, you know, kind of ideas coming from a Musk or from Zuckerberg kind of guy. Whereas when you look at Brzezinski and Soros, these guys really put a lot of emphasis on borders and what borders mean and how to secure borders. But if you start reading into this Parag Khanna, this connectography, one of the things he says is that supply chain is the new arms race, and that militaries will no longer be utilized to secure borders, but they will be utilized to secure supply chains, and that your countries are going to end up being suburbs to your mega cities, right? So you'll have like the mega city of, like, let's say Beijing, for instance, or Houston, or think about up in the Northeast, you have like Boston and New York, so close together. And if you look at it on a map from above, like a geological map, just the lights never stop. It's just like one big city. And so he's saying that, like, basically the states will become subservient to the cities, and that the mayors will become more important than the governors. And I look at, and I was talking to John Robb, when I was talking to John Robb the other day, I was asking him about this. I was like, all right, so do you think that maybe we're witnessing a situation with the Russia-Ukraine fight where it's like, well, let me go here first. My buddy LB Mooney's, I don't know if you've ever had a chance to talk to LB, really great guy, really smart guy. I love talking to the guy. He had made a comment the other day whenever I talked to him. I say the other day, it was probably a few months ago, that if you want to look at where America's borders actually are, look at which borders they're willing to defend. And so he was comparing and contrasting the way America views Mexico and immigrants coming into the United States versus the way they view Ukrainian borders, right? So I started piecing all this together because, like, this isn't an easy puzzle to kind of figure out. And so I asked John Robb, I was like, is this war between Russia and Ukraine the post-World War II globalists versus the more technocratic globalists? Is that kind of what we're viewing? So we're viewing a border versus communication war, basically. And he was like, yeah, in a lot of ways, that's what we're witnessing. That Putin and like Alexander Dugin and the strategists in Russia still view national borders as the most important thing, whereas the West, that's not how they're operating at all. And Parag Khanna lays out this really interesting kind of diagram, and he puts a map up with 210 borders or whatever it is, 210 countries, and he says, "Is this how you view the world?" And then he pulls the borders away and he says, or is this how you view the world? And suddenly you see the infrastructure running from every point of the globe, connecting everything. And he goes, this is the globe's skeleton. And this, and he shows the communication networks, is its nervous system. And I'm wondering if the way like you and I or Scott may view the wars and the way the wars take place and the conflict that's going on across the world from a post-World War II perspective as opposed to a 21st century perspective.
This is an axe, like, the way that you're framing this is not something that I've considered. And I think the only thing I could liken it to is another one of your guests, James Corbett, who I listen to a lot, seems to talk about 3D chess, because this is a popular analogy that's taken place, right? So that there's the nation state level conflict, right? But above that, there's a whole nother playing field. And that playing field is involving different financial interests and different globalists, different elites, different people pulling the strings. And I guess what I would liken it to, this is just how I envision it, is that, and maybe this is where we overlap, is that, of course, the real action is happening on the 3D chessboard, the one above the nation state level, right, and that there's different sects of elites or different moneyed interests, and they don't always get along. But I think that they all have a mutual interest, and those mutual interests are where they kind of come together to advance a shared policy directive or a shared vision or something like that. And I'd have to admit that I don't study this issue enough to really talk about it with authority to know what those different factions are or those different interests or anything like that. I just know certain individuals that I've looked at, and reading that Patrick Wood book about Zbigniew Brzezinski, knowing, trying to identify that technocratic agenda. And I wanted to mention to you, there's this book called We by Yevgeny Zamyatin, which
I've heard of it. I've never read it. I've heard it's awesome though.
Dude, you would love the prose. I have a copy sitting right here actually, because I was just writing a piece on it for a book that I'm working on. But I forgot we don't do video, but
that's all right. I can see it.
It's translated really well from the original Russian, but this is like one of the granddaddies of the dystopian books. And it's said that at the time that this came out, the technocratic agenda had been around, and Patrick Wood is talking about this, and this is why I'm reading his book, is to talk about this with to write, this article I'm working on about it, and this idea of the technocratic agenda, because in the book he envisions a society it's a technocracy. Everything is calculated, and it's deemed out and set forward in mathematical formulas and things like that, and people are assigned everything runs on formulas and stuff like that, and they're building a rocket to go like settle the stars and convert them from the savage state of freedom. It's pretty cool. But 1984, George Orwell and Aldous Huxley both read We. And in some ways, 1984 is a ripoff of We. Some people have talked about that. So, but I guess to go back to what you were saying earlier, or what I was saying earlier, is just that I don't know much about, different sects or different waves of this whole New World Order, for lack of a better term, these globalists. Maybe Zbigniew Brzezinski, if he does favor borders over some kind of globalist system, I think I envision it, and I think maybe James would agree, because he's talked about this before, I think, how the future is not like a one world government, that it's going to be decentralized tyranny, where each national government is responsible for enforcing their own brand of the global agenda, right? Or it's going to be like a George Orwell 1984 situation, where you have Oceania, East Asia, and what's the other one? I forget.
I always forget it too.
Oceania, East Asia, and the other one. Yeah. But they're always at war with each other, right? So
always. I don't know. One of the things I say, and I try to make it very clear that I try not to put it into the category of like conspiracy theory, because the way I look at it is every libertarian I know reads the same books and has the same ends in mind. And so what makes me think that these elites aren't reading the same books and have the same ends in mind?
Oh, of course. Yeah.
And so they may all have different visions of how to reach those ends, but I think that it's quite clear that they do have these ends in mind. And so yeah, it worries me though. I look at what's going on. I was talking to you about this earlier, that there's I've heard people saying that we're at war with Russia. There was that Pat Buchanan article on antiwar.com where he's talking about the leaks coming out, saying, talking about how the United States is giving all this intelligence to the Ukrainians. And I'm like, do they have to figure out some way to instigate a kinetic war? Is that like the only path forward at this point?
I mean, it certainly seems like they don't give a shit whether or not they start one. I mean, in some ways, I don't like this rhetoric where people are like, oh, we're already in the culture war, or we're already in World War III, and we just don't know it yet, or something like that. Because I think they have a point, but at the same time, it's like, well, if we're already at war, then what does it matter if we start shooting? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I don't like it, because we're emphatically not at war right now. I guess at least if you're talking about in the traditional sense, we are not, emphatically not. But that doesn't mean, because Tim Pool is one person who will talk about how, what is 5th generation warfare, and it's not kinetic per se. Yeah, but I mean, you talk about these leaks. I mean, you have the United States claiming, right, that it provided intelligence to destroy the Moskva, and I think that's the Russia's flagship of their navy. Big deal.
And wasn't it like several generals? Wasn't it like 4 or 5
killing
generals?
several Russian generals? Yeah. So this is like remember the Russian bounties story?
Oh God, yeah.
So there was for the listeners, there was a story.
I know. I remember there are people that still believe that story.
Yeah. Well, the Russian bounty stories is that there was a rumor in the twilight days of Afghanistan that the Russians had been paying. Was it they were paying the Taliban for dead U.S. soldiers or something?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. So it's like whenever the U.S. government was paying for scalps of Indians.
Right. Yeah. Well, and we saw it as a serious escalation, you know?
Yeah.
And so, I mean, you have to put the shoe on the other foot and try and think about how Russia would be taking these. And maybe Russia doesn't believe it. Maybe they just don't believe it and it's posturing. I mean, these are unnamed U.S. intelligence sources, if I'm not mistaken, leaking this information. And for their own part, the Russians say that the Moskva was destroyed by a fire. I think a fire in the munitions area or something. I mean, I have no idea what the truth is, but I know someone was saying, I think it was Alexander, I forget his name, from Mercuris. I don't know. Have you ever listened to him from the Duran? He's on YouTube, but he was saying that the Moskva is a really old ship and that it was scheduled to be retired, and that perhaps it wasn't kept up properly and there was a mechanical failure in a fire or something. So
gotcha.
But the truth doesn't matter, right?
Right, and I don't know if it matters to either side.
Yeah,
at this point, and so I'm wondering, do you think that Russia's actions, I don't know, do you think Russia took the actions it took in the invasion because it knew or suspected that there was going to be further American action that was going to cause more problems for Russia had America taken the like offensive side as opposed to the defensive side? Do you think there was something in the works?
Yeah, I really don't know, because I was one of the people who, I was saying that I didn't think that Russia would invade. I didn't think that they would. And I was kind of pushing against the narrative that they would do something like that. I don't think that it was a smart decision. And moreover, I think it's a condemnable action. I mean, to be clear. But there's a broader context here, and that context is how long do you wait? If you're Russia.
Well, yeah, like they made it clear whenever this all started. They said, we're not starting a war, we're finishing one.
Yeah. And the broader context is, I mean, of course, NATO expansion, but it also is a civil war that's been fought in Ukraine since 2014.
Yeah,
history
it's on Wikipedia. It's called the Russo-Ukrainian War.
Yeah,
like it's and it says it's been going on for 8 years.
Yeah,
we're supposed to believe that it just happened in February, and it's like, no, This has been going on for a long time. You talk about this a little bit. You talk about the State Department's involvement in that in your article as well. So this is not something shocking, and I've had Scott on talking about that and gotten into all that, and I don't see how they sell this narrative that, oh, well, it was unprovoked, and it's like, really, was it? Like,
right?
Okay. Yeah. If you say so, but I mean, like, do you remember the snow revolution of 2011?
I don't know.
Okay. Well, yeah, there was an attempt. There was an attempted color revolution inside of Russia to overthrow the government of Russia. And it was, I think they annexed Crimea in 2014, and in 2015 they expelled every organization that George Soros had anything to do with, because they traced all the funding of the Snow Revolution back to George Soros and USAID.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like, okay, like these tensions have been going on for a long time.
Right.
I mean, I'd be shocked if they ever really cooled after the Cold War. You know?
Yeah, I mean, I think that if one thing to watch would be Robbie Martin's A Very Heavy Agenda. I don't know if you've seen that.
No, I'm actually really, really cautious with people on the left that I get information from.
Yeah.
And it's because they tend to have a very heavy agenda of their own. So, you know, so I'm very careful with where I get my information. I do listen to Abby every once in a while. But I have information that would lead to the arrest of Hillary Clinton. No, I have information that I won't disclose publicly, but just so people know that there are people that have told me that Robbie Martin does not care as much for the truth as he seems to, and he has been told while making certain documentaries that some of the information he's putting in there was not completely accurate, and he said, well, that's all right, the cut's already been made, so it's fine, it'll just stay in there. And so knowing that, I just don't pay attention to him.
Right. Yeah. No, and I have no knowledge of that, and I just can't speak about it. I think everyone should, of course, look into sources and things like that. The only reason I bring it up is just because in that documentary, he talks about, bringing it back to my article, he talks about this neoconservative agenda behind the Ukraine situation. And at least I've been able to verify that in terms of, the glaring thing is Victoria Nuland's involvement, right? In 2014 Euromaidan. She's an assistant to she's the Secretary of State's.
She was the Assistant Secretary
of State. Is that like assistant to the general manager?
Yeah, it's like,
what I mean? Well, she was involved, with John McCain handing out sandwiches. I think it was like during the Euromaidan protests, encouraging, there's sections of the right sector and Svoboda party going on. She's there. She's, she was, there was the famous leaked phone call where she's talking about
fuck the EU,
because they won't get involved.
But the real juicy part nobody ever talks about, whenever she's saying, yeah, we're going to put this guy in power because,
right.
Yeah. What was it? The boxer, what was his name? What's the guy's name?
Yats, right?
No. The boxer that she says isn't ready for public office. He was a boxer. I want to say his name starts with a K. I don't even remember. But she's like, yeah, he's not the guy. We're going to go with Yats.
Yeah. Well, but the thing about that, and the thing that I think
Kurashenko or something like that. I think he was a famous boxer back in the 90s. I remember that. He's a politician now, but he was a boxer back in the day.
Well, in the reason why I brought it up, though, is in one thing that I did learn from Robbie's documentary, talking about the connections with Victoria Nuland and, of course, her husband, Robert Kagan, and our friend Bill Kristol over at this time they have this think tank called the Foreign Policy Initiative. And it's a huge neoconservative think tank, and all they've done is push aggressive NATO expansion and aggressive U.S. policy against Ukraine, and against Russia over Ukraine. And you have people like Adam Kinzinger giving talks. That's all right, giving talks at the Foreign Policy Initiative and the Hudson Institute, and being bedfellows with the American Enterprise Institute and things like that. So you have that whole, that connection there.
Yeah. I'm just, like I said, I'm just careful. Like, I believe all that. Like, I don't see any reason why any of that would be exaggerated upon in any way. I know these guys are famously involved in all sorts of think tanks and all kinds of things, and they diversify for a reason. They put themselves in many different positions in order to have these conversations with many different people from many different angles for a reason. And so none of that shocking to me. I would just I just wonder if there's more to it. Like, it just, sometimes things just, I know they, as Tim Pool likes to say, the simplest solution is sometimes it just seems too simple. It's like, really?
Occam's razor.
Yeah, that's what he's always talking about. Fucking that shit. Cool. Occam was a dick anyway. I think about it. I look at the way that they act. I look at the things that they do, and I can't help but think that there's more to it than what's on the surface. Like, for some reason, I don't know what it is about this whole Russia-Ukraine scenario. To me, feels so weird. It's like, we're supposed to believe it's a big deal, but it really doesn't feel like a big deal. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's something about it that feels so engineered that I'm like, I just can't put my finger on it.
Maybe it's because people aren't taking it seriously. I don't feel like people are taking it seriously, because it feels like if the world is on the brink of nuclear war, people should be more freaked out about it, right? And objectively, we're looking at the news, and we're looking at the rhetoric, and we're looking at the billions and billions of dollars. We're looking at the weapons flowing in. And we see all those things, but at the same time, everyone's just going about their daily lives, and they're not even really talking about it. And if they are, I mean, they're talking about what CNN said about it and how.
Yeah, but the rhetoric's weird too. The rhetoric's really strange. Yeah, like, I don't know how much you pay attention to conservatives. I try to watch like some conservative media and some progressive media. And it seems like the conservatives are much more concerned with Russia than the progressives. The progressives don't hardly talk about it. You hear like maybe Kim Iverson, who seems like a fairly honest chick. Like, sometimes I agree with her and sometimes I don't. And that's usually a good barometer that she's at least trying to be honest. And she's talking about, like, she's always talking about America's reaction, which I agree with her on a lot of her points. But then you have, like, Glenn Beck will bring it up. And Glenn Beck will be talking about these rumors of Putin having cancer and having surgeries, and he's lost his mind. It's not the same Vladimir Putin that it used to be, and that he's gone completely crazy, and he's trying
that projection.
It could be, man.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, he's
all
about
those things apply to Biden.
Yeah, but Biden's not saying it.
Yeah.
Glenn Beck is. If Biden were saying it, I was like, oh, yeah. I don't really like pay too much attention to what Biden says because I can't understand what he's saying half the time.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense. Half his sentences are like half thoughts, or I don't even know what he's doing. He said something the other day about he could taste inflation, or I couldn't even figure out what he was talking about. So like I try not to listen to this guy because he makes no sense to me. And I heard somebody say the other day that was that was the Kamala Harris doctrine, is to be able to taste inflation.
Nice.
Sorry. That was a good one. That was hilarious. That cracked me up. But yeah, I know when I'm listening to like conservatives, I don't know if they're convinced or they're trying to convince others that Putin has completely lost his fucking mind and he's totally gone apeshit crazy. And none of his actions are rational. And then I listen to the progressive side and they're like, look, the U.S. is instigating. And it's like, how did we go from what the U.S. did in Maidan was horrible to Putin's lost his fucking mind, and the progressives are the only ones making sense on the issue. You know, it's such an odd turn that I'm just like, something is not feeling correct here. Like, I don't know. It's almost like something's being fed. You know, like we're getting fed a line of bullshit to draw a new line in the sand.
It feels like COVID all over again in some ways, you know.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. I don't know. It's just odd. It's hard for me to even pay attention to the Russia-Ukraine war because I'm not even certain what the hell I'm looking at. You know, it doesn't make any sense to me. Like, Afghanistan kind of made sense. I understood what was happening in Afghanistan. Russia-Ukraine, it feels like we can't get a single honest sentence out of anyone from any side, no matter what they believe or what they think.
And maybe that's just the way the war is, you know. We had 20 years to think about Afghanistan, and we had Scott's book to help us think about Afghanistan. You know, maybe the one interesting thing about this too is that it seems like if you look back at all the things, you know, all the events that happened surrounding Ukraine and NATO's expansion, and you know, a lot of the things that Scott talks about in his speech about how like the new Cold War or whatever is all America's fault, right? It just seems like, well, of course we ended up where we are now, you know, that people were talking about, they were foreseeing doom for decades about the situation. And it's like, okay, well, it's only a matter of time. Like when you know, that explosion that happened in Beirut in Lebanon just the other year, right? Remember that huge explosion that happened?
Yes. Yeah.
Well, if you go back and you look through and they did an investigation and they found, you know, well, this went wrong and this went wrong and this went wrong and this went wrong. And of course this happened. Or like the Challenger explosion, right? They're like, oh, we have, you know, there's these, I don't know, cooling tiles on the rocket or the O-rings in the rocket, and they should have been replaced, but they weren't, and they rushed the launch schedule. So of course the rocket exploded. It seems like that with Ukraine, doesn't it? And it's so weird.
Yeah, it's just a really strange scenario. It's like the whole thing, nothing seems real. It all seems kind of manufactured. It's like Russia is going after Kiev, and now they're not, and then they're just focusing on the east. And I was like, my whole thing was like, why would they expend all the energy to go into Kiev, shoot bombs over into, you know, towards the Polish border to destroy, arms warehouses, when really what their concern is like Donbass and Crimea. Like, I don't understand it. There was this Jacques Bode wrote an article a while back, it was a few weeks ago, where he was talking about the real point of igniting this war was when the Ukrainians started killing people in Crimea, and they put a major offensive on Crimea. And I mean, number one, we didn't hear anything about that, but number two, it's just like, why would they stretch themselves so thin across the country if the real conflict is right there in the east? Like, I don't understand what the whole going to Kiev, like, what were they trying to accomplish by spreading themselves so thin when they could have narrowly focused on this one region and probably been done in a matter of 2-3 days.
And I think that might be what the original plan was, right? I mean, if you listen to Putin's casus belli speech, right? The speech where he tries to give the legal basis for the military action.
Yeah.
I mean, he talks about how Ukraine is historically a part of Russia itself in all the transgressions, right? And it seems to me like the original mission was, and I know there are people who can speak on this better than I can, but the intent really was to do a cut the head off the snake military, like regime change by military means.
Right.
Rush quick to Kiev, or at least put pressure on the leadership, choke off the country, get rid of Zelensky, get rid of the Nazis. Of course, that's what Putin is saying.
Right.
And so maybe that's the whole point of going in and to create a state that is not so friendly to the West and to create this buffer zone. And I don't think that, that entails Putin taking half the country and making it part of Russia. I think it's at least creating a buffer area that's larger than Donbass, or at least encompasses all of Donbass's traditional real estate, borders. Yeah.
Yeah. Because I've been watching it. I watch that, like, I haven't been watching him like constantly, but I keep up with that Patrick Lancaster guy who's on the ground with the Chechens and the Russian troops there in like Mariupol and the Donbass region. And excuse me, his rhetoric makes it sound like it's all Ukraine, like bombing schools and doing this and doing that. Right. And then you turn on the news here and it's all Russia bombing schools and committing these atrocities. And it's like, I mean, war is messy. I get that. I'm not like oblivious to that fact. It seems like there's this lack of real journalism on the subject of what it is that we're actually witnessing. Is this a lead up to World War III, or is this another civil conflict that's going to end up like so many other civil conflicts? Is this Kosovo all over again? Like, what are we looking at? Like, and that's what's really difficult, because it doesn't feel like when I listen to what Putin says and I see that the amount of military aggression, it doesn't feel like it's a lead up to anything bigger. But when I see America's response to Russia's actions, I'm like, if anybody's instigating a bigger war, it's America. And that's where I'm concerned is how is that going to play itself out?
Well, don't you know that Putin is going to roll through Poland and roll through, Finland? I'm being sarcastic here.
Yeah, no, I know.
No.
But I'm pretty certain that the Finns and Swedes coming out saying they're going to join NATO didn't help the situation.
No.
that was, I think that was probably pretty stupid at this point in time. It's like I said, it feels like they're really instigating. Like there's this, like they're trying to create an Afghanistan situation for Russia.
Well, what I really think the goal is regime change in Moscow and regime change in Beijing. Now, we haven't talked about China at all on this podcast, but I think that's what it is, man. That's the formula. Of course, wouldn't from the perspective of the West, what is a real win here? I think a real win for the West is to win a war without fighting a war. Is to just as Putin wants to cut the head off the snake of the Ukrainian leadership, I think the West knows that it can never fight a war with Russia. So how do you win without fighting a war with Russia? Well, you regime change, get them bogged down in a war in Ukraine for 10, 20 years. That's how we did it with the USSR. So we can do it again.
What do you think they want a regime change in China?
Oh, for the same reasons, I think.
I mean, but with what goal in mind? What do you think they would? Where do you think they would go with that? I'm not certain. It's possible they feel that way. I don't know enough about the China situation, but it seems like there's a lot of partnerships with China. In the U.S. Seems like they're very cozy with China, which is why I think China's been kind of reluctant to say or do anything about the whole Russia-Ukraine thing, because China makes a lot of money pushing Russian oil and natural gas. They make a lot of money from the U.S. too. So it's like,
right.
We'll just act like we're oblivious to the fact,
Well, China's another really interesting thing, right? I mean, you have Western investment all over China, especially when Deng Xiaoping takes over, and you have kind of there's this book by Anthony Sutton that I have talked about before called "It's the Wall Street Trilogy," where he talks about how Wall Street money funded the Nazis and how Wall Street money funded the Bolsheviks and China. And it's really interesting how people in the West say, China's this horrible totalitarian regime and they're communists and they're terrible, but they really knew how to handle COVID. And I think, wouldn't it be nice if we could do a lot of the things they're doing here? And so, of course, we have this good relationship, this trade relationship with China. But I think what you really have is this idea that China and Russia are forming this multipolar world order, that they are the countries that don't bow down to the United States in the Western rules-based liberal international order, right? And I think
that's a Russian delusion.
What is?
The multipolar world order. I think that's a Russian delusion. I think China is forming a unipolar world order. All right. So Beatrix being from South Africa.
Yeah.
I kind of have like an idea of how China operates in foreign countries. I remember talking to her, and we were trying to decide whether she was going to move here to America or I was going to move there to South Africa. So I was talking about these are the skills I have. These are the things I could do over there to earn a living. Well, driving a truck, you can't earn a living over there driving a truck. So I started talking, I know how to do security systems because I did that for years, and I know how to do construction. Both of which are monopolized by the Chinese government. all of South Africa's buildings, all their infrastructure, everything comes from China. It's all Chinese labor.
Really?
Run by the Chinese government. All the oil production out of South Africa is sold to the West. If you look at like Hollywood, it's run by China. If you look at who owns more land in the United States than any other country, it's China. If you look at, like, let's just take Mitch McConnell, for instance. Mitch McConnell's wife is the daughter of a Chinese oligarch. I really think what we're looking at is an economic unipolar world of China, in which you have China as the economic center and America as the military center. And so you have the economic arm and you have the enforcement arm. That's the way it feels to me. That's the way it appears. I think Russia is delusional in thinking they're going to interrupt this partnership that has been coming to fruition between China and the United States. Because China doesn't touch oil and gas in Africa or in the Middle East, but America doesn't touch the infrastructure. It's like there's this treaty that we'll do this, you do that. We're going to split the responsibilities here.
Well, it's interesting. I guess that kind of plays into the idea of 3D chess, right? Because on the nation state level, you have the United States naming China as being, the number one threat, and that, the 21st century will be defined by strategic, great power competition with China. And I haven't done this, but I think it's really good to take a look at the objective facts, right? And if the United States is saying one thing, which is, hey, we're going to define the 21st century with strategic power competition, we need to militarily confront China, tell them that they can't be ruling the Indo-Pacific and the South China Sea. Yes, all these things I've talked about a shitload. Selling weapons to Taiwan, training Taiwanese Marines, sailing warships through the Strait of Taiwan, and doing all those things. But if on the economic front, there's some kind of de facto partnership between the U.S. and China, which there is in our trade relations, but if they're carving up the world, like you're saying, with clearly establishing division of labor in a sense, like China, you can have this country and do these things here. And maybe it is. And that kind of earlier we were talking about this. I mentioned this idea of decentralized tyranny, right?
Mm-hmm. I've talked about decentralized tyranny before.
Yeah.
There's this article, that guy that I'm reading, that book by Parag Khanna, he wrote an article. It's called Dismantling Empire Through Devolution. So what he's talking about is he's saying, with Brexit and these decentralized movements, give the people their culture. Let them have their culture. Let them have that, and we'll buy off, and we'll pay for, and we'll own the politicians and the corporations and all the business. So they can have their culture, but we're going to own the resources.
Yeah.
Right. Basically is what he's saying. That podcast I just did with Pete, this is kind of what we were talking about. And we're talking about the amount of money that these billionaires are dumping into local politics, right? So you had Mark Zuckerberg dump $350 million into local elections during 2020. There's an LLC called Arabella Advisors that dumped over $1.2 billion into local elections during 2020. And they utilized 501c3s to launder the money in. So you had like the new venture fund, You had a 1613 fund. You had a Hopewell fund, and these, they had several. I think it was 5 or 6 501c3s that they were utilizing to launder money in. You have like the Gill Foundation, who's funding all the LGBTQIA, WKRP in Cincinnati organizations. So you have all these billionaires pumping money in to local regions to do all these things locally, and they distract us with the global stage or the national stage, whether it's president or war or whatever, while locally they're taking all the resources, all the infrastructure away from the people.
I think that there was a real panic over these populist movements of the last decade, because although I reserve judgment that in his heart, Donald Trump was just more of the same.
I think it goes back to what I was saying. I was having this conversation with Kyle Matovic earlier. You know Kyle?
Yeah.
So, yeah, we were texting back and forth about Trump earlier. I was like, well, Trump was like basically just Bill Clinton, right? So he was a post-World War II guy.
Yeah.
Right? But we're talking about technocrats now. So they can't have those post-World War II guys anymore. You need more technocrats. So I think that's where the because I always said this during Trump's entire presidency. I'm like, he's just Bill Clinton.
Yeah.
You know, he's no cruder than Bill Clinton was. He's just Bill Clinton. Like, if you look at his policies, you look at the way he acts, like, he's just Bill Clinton. That's all he is. But yeah, we're past the stage of Bill Clinton. This is a 21st century, yo.
Right.
You know? So,
well, I do think, though, that the populist movements behind them, and then you get the Brexit movement and Marine Le Pen in France and that kind of stuff. I do think that it gave the elites pause in a sense, or at least made them rethink this. And this is speculative. I don't fucking know for sure, but I would think that it would have to give them pause and think about, okay, well, how do we at least divert this populist energy? You know, do we control the demagogues that the populist movement gets behind? Or do we, you know, because I think it's always been like, I mean, you give them a selection of 2 pre-approved candidates or 2 pre-approved results or issues.
Or 17 or, you know,
yeah.
You didn't like these 2. How about one of these 17?
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, at the end of the day, they're all, what is Tom Woods' rule? They're all John McCain.
They're all John McCain.
17 John McCain.
No matter who you elect, you always get John McCain.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, yeah, and that's kind of the thing. Like, I think Trump was different. I really do. But because I think he was an old world guy, right? I think he was a 90s guy. I think he was like, well, this is what we're supposed to be. This is the way we're supposed to operate. So I think he was different than the modern politicians. I think that what you have to worry about, what you have to look out for, and I'm not saying that this is for sure, but as you said, they were worried. They were concerned about the populist movements. How do you hijack the populist movements? Well, why not some hot Hawaiian chick, you know, who comes across as a populist? You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah.
And I'm not saying that's a guarantee. I mean, I have no evidence of this. I'm just saying this would be a strategy to use, right? Or an AOC, a Bernie Sanders, right? Someone who's going to play the game. Like, because the one thing I can say that the one thing about Trump that changed my mind is when he was getting impeached for the Ukraine situation. And I can't remember the guy. I always forget the guy's name, who was testifying in court, and he was the ambassador to the Ukraine. And he said, we had our Ukraine policy situated. And he came in and he shook it up. He created chaos by trying to change it. Right? So you have this is the way we do things. And he didn't like the way we did things. I don't think they would have spread the lies about Russiagate or tried to impeach him, 5,000 times if he was playing the game. I really think whatever he was doing, which I think what he was trying to do was preserve the 20th century. But whatever he was doing, there was something that he was doing that was not operating within their wheelhouse. And doesn't mean that he didn't. It's like I said to Kyle earlier when I was talking to him. I was like, no, Trump did not play their game, but he did not go against their game either. He still thought it was the politics of the early 2000s. And that's the game he was playing. Well, they're playing a completely different game. We're looking at technocrats now. We're not looking at the politicians of the 20th century. We're in the middle of a fourth industrial revolution.
Well, maybe it was just that Trump, and I don't know, again, this is just an idea. Maybe it was just that he was a different wing of one of the power factions, or one,
Yeah, I honestly just think that that they hated Trump because he didn't want to advance into the transhumanist agenda.
Or but at the same time, he did push the vaccines at the beginning, and to me,
he
that's
still pushes the vaccine.
Well, right, he still does.
But I mean, who didn't like the vaccines in the 90s, right? He's still thinking about old technology. This is what I'm saying. I think he's caught in the old world. I think mentally he is stuck in the 20th century. We're talking about two different things. Like, you're talking 21st century versus the 20th century. It's two different things going on here. I think he is mentally, he lives in the 20th century. Like, he's not aware of the changes. He's not. I mean, it's hard enough for me at 42 years old to wrap my mind around these changes that's going on. Imagine him, he's 80 or whatever he is. Like, it's just not feasible for him to grab onto these things and understand what it is.
Well, to me, on the other side, he plays in perfectly to what my theory is here, Tommy.
Oh, shit.
So, well, it's just, I don't know if you've heard me talk about.
Am I being a useful idiot?
No. I have this one theory, that explains a complex world, boiling it down to one simple statement, right? No. Because I'm being sarcastic, because that's what the critique of conspiracy theorists is that you just try to make sense, that conspiracy theories are just trying to make sense of an infinitely complicated world where things happen seeming at random, but we need to create some kind of narrative so our brain, implies connections that simply aren't there, right? Or something like that.
Yeah.
That's the critique. I think it's pretty naive. But at the same time, just my whole idea is that there's two parallel narratives here, right? We have, on the one hand, we have the progressives who are demonizing Russia. They, are saying that Trump is Putin's puppet. They're saying that Russia has attempted regime change against us by hacking the election. There's the Russiagate stuff. So they're getting half the country to hate Russia and think that Russia's evil and that they're attacking us. And the other half, and this is what I think, where I think Donald Trump plays into the whole agenda, if you will, is that we're bringing in Trump to get people to hate China, and that we are, putting in this whole agenda that China's stealing our intellectual property, that they're stealing our jobs, that they're going to take over the world. And so you have Trump and then the populist right carrying on with that narrative and really pushing it. We need to get out of the Middle East and avoid war with Russia so that we can fight China or encircle China or do those things. And at some point in time, like in the national defense strategies from 2018 and 2020 say, we're in the middle of a new Cold War, renewed great power competition with Russia and China. At some point in time, those narratives will meet together, right? If there is a war, the United States is going to have to get they're going to have to get most of the public on board with the war. And the war is going to be against Russia and China. So if we have one half the country hate each side, then we can fight our war.
Huh.
And that's just my pet theory.
Oh, well, I mean, I can't argue that wouldn't be a way to go about it.
Well, it's an unfalsifiable statement.
If you can avoid civil war in the process.
Yeah. Well, see, and that's how they dealt. I was going to say this too, Tommy, is that's how they dealt with these populist movements, in my opinion, is that they just injected culture war politics into it. And that's why, like, I don't really talk about culture a lot on my podcast, because some people get really mad when you call it a distraction. But I'm not saying it's completely unimportant, but I think that I'm an anti-war guy, man.
They can't sell the war without the culture, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, they have to control the culture to sell the war.
I'm not saying we shouldn't push for, I do think people assume that culture is or that politics is downstream from culture. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't try to develop our own uniquely, independent libertarian culture, whatever it is. I'm a conservative, so that has conservative values for me. I'm saying that, it's this divide and conquer agenda. If we're fighting the left, we can't fight the state. But then again, I know the counter argument to that would be that, well, the left controls the state.
Well, that was the first thing that popped in my head, but I wasn't going to say it because it seemed kind of cliche. So
it's true to a degree,
I was just thinking through it. My thing is, like, all right, it's like I had this question come up the other day when I was on with Reed and Eric Jackman and Adam Fitzgerald. Or Fitzpatrick. Fitzgerald. Okay, thank you.
I'm Patrick.
You're Patrick. I'm horrible with names, man. I have 5 kids.
No,
I can barely remember their names.
I'm just saying that's where Patrick popped into your head.
Maybe that's very possible. Yeah. So we had this conversation and about whether I'm more anti, or whether I think being anti-war or anti, well, it's not even really anti-culture, but like against the current views on war or culture are more important. And my entire point is that even when you're selling anti-war sentiment, you do it through the culture. Like, if you want to sell the war, I mean, look at it, like how quickly the Ukrainian flags went up on Twitter, right? If you want to sell the war, you have to infiltrate the culture. If you want to end the wars, you have to infiltrate the culture. Look at the Vietnam War, right? I don't think you can focus. And I'm not saying there isn't utilization for a Scott Horton or somebody who only focuses on foreign policy. It gives those people that are able to infiltrate and influence culture the ammunition they need to push the culture in the correct direction. But you definitely have to have a culture aspect moving, because the culture is the dominant factor at all times. Wherever that culture moves, you're talking about kind of Carl Jung's idea of the collective subconscious now when you're talking culture, right? So you're talking about the meme, so to speak, of the culture. And so that culture has to be shifted. That subconscious has to move into the direction of anti-war to breed an anti-war culture. And so you don't do that through facts, because people don't make decisions based upon facts. People make decisions based upon how they feel, right? So there was this really famous quote that I like to say. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And you influence culture through feeling, not knowledge. You influence intellect through knowledge. And there are very few people, which is why there are very few libertarians. Very few people are moved by their intellect. Most people are moved by their emotions.
Yeah. And I'd argue that even libertarians
that's true. And I wouldn't argue that.
Well, I think, though, I've been thinking about this a lot because, I'm someone who I've talked about, well, I just did. I kind of presented to you this idea that the culture war isn't something that should be front and foremost in what we're looking to do, looking to engage in is the culture war. I don't think, and much like politics itself, I don't think that there is something that we can do to affect things. I think that we are on a track in that there's nothing that we could do to change where that track is headed, that things happen in the world. Like, if you think about why the American Revolution happened, was it people who made a decision to make that happen? Like the culture of liberty that was created in the United States, just as an example, was that born about by people trying to actively move the culture in one direction or another? Or was it something that just happened as the happenstance of history? You have these divergent religious groups being persecuted. This is the story we all learned in school. These divergent religious groups being persecuted in Europe and then being given charters to settle the New World. And the very act of them being dissidents in the first place, going across the world to a wilderness where they have to develop low time preference. So you already have, cultures that are anti-authoritarian being persecuted, going to a place where they have to rely on themselves and develop rugged individualism in a way that creates the American spirit, right? It wasn't someone who was sitting there willing this to happen. And that's why I think that if there's going to be any kind of spirit of liberty or anything that develops in this nation, it's not going to be because, a bunch of our friends will it to happen or try to influence culture by being influential. It's going to happen because, it's good. There's going to be, I don't know, there's going to be another Great Depression, and it's going to force people to develop this low time preference behavior on their own or else die. And in that, there's going to be a culture that's created, like, how all these people, your great grandmother or something lived through the Depression, and they developed all these habits in a culture of self-reliance because they had to. Mm-hmm. And I guess that's just my whole point. Okay.
But even during the American Revolution, there were pamphleteers.
Right. And I've talked about that a lot. Yeah. You're using my own idea against me.
I am. but it's not, I think what I'm saying, though, I think what the point is that you need an equation comes together or a formula comes together whenever the equation is complete, right? So there
were pamphleteers, right? But there were people.
You needed both.
Yeah.
To operate. See, here's kind of my thing. All right. So like we kind of discussed this a little bit ahead of time. So like let's touch on this a little bit. Like all right. So if I were to just like ask you from the libertarian perspective about public education, you would tell me about Prussian schooling, right? You would talk about John Taylor Gatto, his experiences in Prussian schooling, right? Okay. That doesn't work for 90% of the people.
Right.
Because they don't look at being raised patriotic to give back to their country as a threat to their children. But what they do view as a threat to their children is teaching degeneracy, grooming, perversion, pedophilia. That's a threat to children, right?
Right.
So whenever I look at what's going on around, number one, it's crazy that anybody has to argue that you would teach a child between the ages of 4 and 9 that they were some kind of sexual degenerate. Like, what child at 5 years old, 6 years old, 7 years old is thinking about sex without some outside influence pushing them to think about that?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so it's damaging to the child's health. No, there's never been a scientific study that said, oh, if you molest a child at the age of 8 years old, they're going to grow up to be a fully functional, well-developed human being. They're going to have no issues whatsoever. You know, that just doesn't happen.
Right.
So there's a threat at the moment of sexual deviancy and degeneracy being pushed upon children. And I have never heard more conservatives say, get your children out of public schools than I have in the last year. To me, it's sad. It took a threat that is so pernicious to push them to that point, but I'm glad they are at that point, and I'm very much willing to work with them at that point.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's a fair way of looking at it.
Yeah.
If it were my kids, and I have a granddaughter who's not in school, but if it were my kids in school having these things, and I were to sit in on a Zoom classroom and hear the teacher say these things to my children, I would have a serious problem with that teacher. Right?
Right. Yep.
And it doesn't matter how widespread it is. It has happened that people have heard this. They have witnessed this. There was a teacher I saw from Libs of TikTok earlier bragging because she was teaching kindergartners about white privilege, and a lot of the parents were upset about it. And she goes, "Oh, I'm sorry that made you uncomfortable." And so it is happening. I don't know to what extent it's happening, but it is happening somewhere in some places to some children. If that's what it took to bring awareness to the parents that this system that you're entrusting your children into, I think it was Malcolm X that said, only a fool would entrust his children to be educated by his enemy. If that's what it's taking, then I'm all for them to figure it out in that way. Even if they believe that these things are happening in some areas that they aren't happening in. But I can tell you this much. In November of last year, the entire school board of a small town in Texas called Southlake, Texas, was completely thrown out and voted out because they were teaching critical race theory and they were teaching transgenderism to a lot of people that were like, no, you're not going to do this. And it created like a mini civil war. There was no violence, but it was a mini civil war within that community in which all of that school board was completely thrown out and completely new people were elected into place. And so if this is what it takes to open people's eyes to the propaganda that is being shoved down children's throat at that level of their life, then it's very valuable to us to be able to say, I wouldn't want my children going through that either. And we need to look at these other things too. And we can actually have like honest conversations about how far within a child's life a teacher should be involved. Because if you ask me, if there is to be a public school that exists, they focus on reading, writing, and arithmetic. Everything else is left up to the parents. You see what I'm saying? Right. And so we're chipping away at the power that these teachers unions and these public education systems have over the children of the future.
Right. Well,
that may be a utilitarian way of viewing it. It's just kind of the way I'm looking at it.
No, I mean, and I don't necessarily disagree with that either. I mean, I've been involved in school board races here, at least tangentially, knowing people and encouraging people to run for school board who are going to get rid of, all the COVID bullshit. And I guess, so I guess I don't really know where the disagreement is in terms of if there is one even. Like, I do think it's good to get rid of the school boards here and to make sure that teachers aren't teaching critical race theory or pushing. I heard, and I'm in very conservative, deep red Wisconsin, right? Uh-huh. I heard that there's a neighboring school district where there have been litter boxes installed in the school.
I heard you talk about this.
Furries.
Yeah, I heard you talk about this. That's crazy. If they have done it, it's insane.
But I will tell you that I believe this is true, that there are there's a friend of ours who was saying that they went to their kids' choir concert, and the kids in middle school, like 7th grade, 6th, 7th grade.
Yeah.
And there were 2 girls that were giving a solo at the choir concert. And the friend asked her daughter after the fact, "Oh, who are those girls, who did the solo?" And they had tails
like
clipped
Bob
to them.
And Mike.
They had tails clipped to them. They had tails clipped to them. And the daughter says, "Oh, Mom, well, those weren't girls, they were furries." That did happen. Right. And so at what point are these schools encouraging delusions that their students are having? And at what point do we need to step in and make sure that they're not doing that? You know what I mean? Because if a kid comes to school and says, "Hey, I'm Helen Keller," or "I'm Anne Frank," is the school going to go and start calling her Anne, or what have you? Put her in the attic. Yeah. And I don't think that should happen, and to the extent that it's true, I don't think teachers should be, but
you should never, you don't want to discourage a kid from using their imagination, but you don't want a kid to live within a delusion. There's a fine line there, you absolutely encourage the exploration of imagination, but you don't encourage them to mutilate themselves in the process of living that imagination. You have to take in the well-being of the child at all times. As far as I'm concerned, there's no excuse to me for anybody other than a parent teaching a child about sex.
Right.
You're not going to sell me on that. I'm old school, but nobody's ever going to sell to me that it would be better for them to teach my child about sex.
Yeah.
And to have these conversations with my children. Right. I told you before, and I've said it before on the show, so it's fine to talk about it. When my son was 15 years old, he told me he was pansexual. I was like, "What? That's fucking weird. What is that?" And he tells me, and I'm like, "What makes you think that?" And he's like, "Well, I love everybody." And I'm like, "Yeah, but you're 15 years old, dude. You don't know what you are. You're just chill out. You don't have to figure this out today, And part of it, he's not. This particular, he's my oldest son. He's quite autistic. He's very impressionable. He wants to make everybody happy. He didn't come up with that idea on his own. And I've heard stories, and I told you this before, that I've heard stories that there are children 7, 8-year-old children telling their parents that they're pansexual because they love everyone, because their teacher asked them how they identified, and they didn't understand the question. And so the teacher was like, who do you love? And they were like, my mom. And they're like, who else do you love? And like, my dad. Well, who else do you love? Well, I love everyone. Oh, you're pansexual. And you got a 7-year-old running around going, I'm pansexual. When sex has nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
You know, it's a 7-year-old.
Right.
And so there are these things that are happening. They are occurring. Like I said, I don't know to what scale. But if you let these things take hold, they will persist. It's not like, oh, well, it's only going to happen in 4 school districts ever in the history of the United States. For the next 2,000 years, it will only happen in 4 school districts. No. Like, ideas gain popularity. They move around. And do you want a complete degeneration of society for your children to grow up in, or your grandchildren to grow up in? You know, it's like I was saying earlier, maybe we should go back to like strict segregation. You send all the LGBTQIA to one half of the world, and all the breeders live on the other half of the world. And in 100 years, we'll check back in and see who still exists. You know, like it just doesn't make sense to me that like most parents, and I think that's what you're seeing, and that's where a lot of this anger is coming from, are parents finding out that their children are actually being taught this. You could see there was the election in Virginia where this happened, right? And everybody kind of tries to play it down. It's like, parents witnessed this. They got upset. They got mad. What are you going to do about an angry parent? Like, you know, I mean, you're a parent. I'm a parent. Like, what do you do about an angry parent, right? You just kind of like, my bad. You know, like, what do you say? Get out of the way. Yeah, exactly.
So my main concerns are, and I'm not saying that there shouldn't be a day of reckoning for the school districts in terms of voting people out or, you know, shutting it down or whatever, there's a few questions, right? Do we have concern? My biggest concern, I guess, is a moral panic, mob justice type situation, right? Where a witch hunt situation. That's my biggest concern.
Does that chick have a dick?
Well, we've already.
I think about Crocodile Dundee. Every time you meet a new chick, you just reach up and grab her crotch.
Well, we've already seen this, man. I mean, I guess I won't name drop unless you want to, but there has been a very high profile libertarian figure who's been accused of sexual misconduct. You know,
don't think I know who you're talking about.
Well, the audience.
You can tell me later, but I don't think I know.
Well, there's the groomer label has been thrown around. Let's just say that.
Oh, I know who you're talking about now.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. And that is witch hunt behavior, you know. In the groomer label itself, it's a very, very specific term, and it's a very serious term. I mean, the term grooming is a specific pedophilic sexual behavior. Grooming kids specifically, according to federal law, even the definition of grooming is coercing or influencing a minor to engage in sexual acts.
Right.
And it's the engaging in sexual acts. And so like yes, I totally understand where people are coming from, and I understand this desire to stop it. So it's that kind of the overreaction. And of course, you know, I'm not saying that culture, you know, our modern culture suffers from an overuse of conservative values, right? But we're forgetting a lot of the bad things about conservatives, right? I mean, they're insular, they're closed-minded, they're puritanical, they go on witch hunts, you know, they're obsessed with this whole like idea of like cleanliness and being disgusted and being afraid of the other, which I mean, that's the bad side of it. There's a lot of good to it too. I'm conservative myself. I mean, I was raised conservative. So,
right.
But so I do have concerns with the overreaction, right? The other thing is that can you truly legislate away what is a deeply cultural issue? You know, is that putting a Band-Aid on a broken arm?
Well,
and are there constitutional implications?
Well, I think as far as the legislation goes, we can talk about the witch hunt stuff here in a second, because I think that's a much deeper conversation to have. Yeah. As far as the legislation goes, I think what you can do is at a community level, I think that, all right, so like I live in a small town, or just outside of a small town, but let's say I live in the small town. It's about 2,000 people. If they passed a law saying they did not allow transgenders in the town, I wouldn't have a problem with it. And it's not because I think that transgenderism should be like discriminated against, but it's because they have specific model that they want to uphold, and they want to keep their town in a certain way. And I'm fine with that. I don't have a problem with that. Right? And because that transgender family or person would have somewhere else they could go, right? They could always go to California. They could always go to New York. Why do the progressives get their own spaces, but the conservatives don't? I always wondered that. So I'm all about let the community figure out what they want. I'm not going to push. I mean, I have my life. I'm actually pretty secluded. I don't really mess with a lot of people. I'm actually quite an introvert, believe it or not. I come home, I sit at home, and I work at home when I'm not at work. That's what I do. I don't go out. I don't mess with a lot of people. I talk to people online more than I talk to real people, except for my wife. That's it. Like, that's my life. Right. And so it wouldn't bother me like one way or the other. It wouldn't affect me. It was just like whatever. So if they wanted to push out long-haired, big-beard hippies, then I guess I would have to go find another place to live. Of course, so would half the town. But I mean, it's just, I'm just saying, like, there are other places. You're not entitled to a region or an area. So the problem I have with the leftists that I don't have with the right, and this is why I kind of, I wouldn't even say I cozy up to the right, but I identify more with their plight and what their grievances are. The leftist doesn't want you to be able to have your spot.
Right, yeah.
You have to live their way. The right doesn't do that. The right's just like, leave me alone, fine. Yeah. Don't push your values down my throat and we're good. And I'm okay with that because I can do that. Like, I can live like that.
I think right now the right is like that, but even as recently as, the Satanic Panic, what is, you should know the Judas Priest thing with, what's that chick's name? The one who went on a crusade against heavy metal.
I don't know.
Barry, it started with a B. It sounded like it was like a guy's name.
Oh, I honestly, I have no clue.
Well, there was like
I've heard of the Satanic Panic, but I've never witnessed any of it.
Yeah,
I just wasn't like, I grew up listening to
Tipper Gore.
Oh yeah, that definitely starts with a B.
Yeah, definitely does.
Sorry.
No, you're right.
Oh no, yeah, I do remember she wanted the warning labels put on CDs and all that stuff. Yeah, but she wasn't conservative.
I thought she was.
No, isn't that Al Gore's daughter?
I don't think
wife or something. I thought maybe. I don't know. I thought she was. It didn't even matter. Like, I mean, what was their complaint though?
Oh, you're fucking right. She was what? Al Gore's. Yeah, it was Al Gore's wife. Maybe she wasn't conservative.
I mean, no, they invented the internet. There's no way they're conservative. Nothing says progress like the internet. Haven't you been on it?
Oh, Jesus. Yeah. Well, anyways,
I do know that like there have been situations where conservatives freak out, but they don't want to like. I've never, and maybe I'm just ignorant to the fact. I don't remember any situation where conservatives ever tried to make living a lifestyle illegal federally. Like maybe in a community, maybe locally, maybe states didn't want things to happen in their states. You know, kind of like this whole abortion debate. Like, it seems to me like conservatives have always had more of a grasp on federalism than Democrats.
Yeah.
You know,
well,
I could be wrong. I might have missed some things. I wasn't always political, so.
No, I just mean historically, you know, I've done a lot of work on nullification, and it's like federalism is used by whoever it's most politically convenient to use it. You know, it's like if you're not in power, you love federalism, but if you are in power, you hate it, and it doesn't matter.
Well, and we might be in a situation like you might be completely correct, and we might be in a situation where like Rothbard was, you know, all with the paleos for a while, but prior to that, he was teaming up with communists.
Right.
You know, so we might be in that kind of situation where it's just the best alliance at this point in time.
Yeah.
And in 20 years, it may not be convenient anymore.
Yeah.
Right. Very possibly. Not if Tho Bishop has his way, it won't work out that way. But, you know,
well,
I'm down for a Tho Bishop Republican Party, dude. I'm sorry.
I mean, I think for me, it's like, I praise good policy and I call out bad policy.
Yeah.
And I'm not willing to jump on a bandwagon if that means ignoring things. Like, I'm not going to ignore DeSantis being, you know, being fucking pro-Israel. I'm not going to ignore DeSantis being, or the populist right being anti-China, especially right now.
Right.
You know?
And you got to be aware of how much of what DeSantis is doing is virtue signaling to the conservative movement. Right. And how much of it is actually like making some sort of progress in some sort of direction. I do like what he did with that, with the parents and education bill. I like that. Like, parents should be more involved in their kids' education. They should be, you know, but it should be the parents' choice, you know, to be involved. I think parents should be more involved. I made a comment. I posted on Twitter the other day that I thought that there should be a live feed for parents to be able to access in order to see what their children are learning.
Yeah.
And of course, some lulbert fucking commented, wrong. There shouldn't be public schools. It's like, who the fuck said anything about public schools? I'm making a comment about parents being involved in their children's lives.
Yeah.
Like, Jesus. What a fucking idiot. I said, that's what I told him. I said, who said anything about public schools? He said, I did. I said, so how does that make me wrong, you fucking idiot?
That's like, I don't know. You can't have, it's kind of like you can't have an opinion. If you go to a restaurant and the food comes out cold, you can't be mad because it's a private business.
Yeah. I can't write a review online at all. That doesn't exist. There's no such thing. If we got rid of the FDA, we wouldn't have private companies trying to figure out the quality of these things. You know,
right.
Just no, you got to take what you get.
Yeah.
If it's poison, it's poison. You just take it.
It's funny because private schools exist right now.
Exactly. And that's what I was saying. Like, I didn't say anything about public schools. I was just saying parents should have access to a live feed of their children's classroom. That's all I said. I don't care if it's public school, private school. Like, you can imagine whatever school you want. You could be in Hogwarts. I don't care. You know? It's like, whatever, dude, man. Like, people are so fucking closed-minded. They don't want to have these conversations. But no, so Yeah, we could be in a situation where, like I said, it could just be an alliance of convenience. It's just where we're lining up today, right? Yeah. And I mean, my family has always been. Well, my dad was a progressive in college, and now he's very much a conservative. And but I would say, like, I came from the school of thought that Thomas Jefferson was pretty much right, you know, on his writings, you know. So I wasn't a Hamiltonian. I would have never agreed with Hamilton or, you know, only Madison half the time. So
yeah, fuck Hamilton.
Right. Yeah. And his goddamn play.
Yeah. I won't watch that fucking. Hey, let me ask you one thing though. If you are in an alliance of convenience, does that mean that you should abstain from criticizing your allies? I mean,
no, absolutely not.
But
like, I don't
drag them over the coals.
Well, it's like whenever you send an article into the Libertarian Institute, right? Yeah. And you get it back, and it's got, you know, like all these notes next to it. You got it. We need you to do this, this, and that. Like, you're not shying away from the criticism. There's such thing as constructive criticism. You can be critical of somebody without being a total dick.
Yeah. Right.
So,
well, here's
if I respect you, if I respect you as a person, why would I be a total ass to you? If I have a criticism for you, I'll just tell you, but I'll do it so in a respectful way. I'm not going to be a fucking total dick, you know?
I like being a dick.
Yeah, but I mean, like, you're not a dick, dude. Like, you've had criticisms of me or my writings or whatever, and we've talked about it, and you've told me what you thought, and I'll be like, okay, and I got something out of it because you're being constructive about it. You're like, hey, look, I want my friend, my ally, to better himself and be better off. Like, I'm not trying to tear you down. I'm trying to make you better. Right, I want you to be a better ally. I don't want you to be a worse ally.
Well, here's the situation with like Marjorie Taylor Greene or DeSantis or something like that. It's like, I mean, what is supporting someone in a political sense, right? You vote for them, or you campaign to get other people to vote for them.
Or you send them Israeli space lasers.
or Israeli IDF bomb squads or something.
Right.
No, I just mean, like, if you are getting DeSantis, if you support DeSantis, you're getting DeSantis. You're getting the good DeSantis, and you're getting the bad DeSantis. Right.
But is you know, this boils down. Here's part of the thing. Unfortunately, we live in a world or in a country that is, I mean, it's bipolar.
Right.
You know? And there's never been a libertarian candidate to prove they can get more than 3% of the vote. And they would consider it a win if the president in 2024 got 5%. And that's not a win. What is that a win for?
Yeah.
What are you chipping away at? You know? And so what if you get 5% of the vote because you get the exact same amount of votes you got in 2020, but both the other candidates get less votes and still kick your ass? Just because your percentage went up doesn't mean you're reaching more people. It doesn't mean you're doing anything. Like, and so they're not even the problem that we're dealing with here, and this is a major issue that I see with the libertarian strategy, is that you're asking people to give money to a candidate, give time and money to a candidate they know is going to lose. And so they know they're wasting their time and money.
Right.
And that who wants to be in that situation?
Well,
so why not take, like, and I mean this, like, honestly, why not take a Dave Smith and put him in the Ron Paul situation from 2008 where he's running as a Republican, right?
Because he'd never win as a Republican.
but it's not about him winning at that point. Ron Paul made more moves in 2008. If you're going to run, if Dave Smith, let's just say this, if Dave Smith's going to run, he's going to accept these donations. He's going to accept the donor's time. He's going to accept all these things. Why not do it in a position to where you have more exposure? You're still getting the same amount of donations, the same amount of time. You're not losing anything by doing that.
Right.
You're actually getting more. You're getting more. And I think this is Stowe Bishop's argument. I'm not even saying I agree with that, because I don't think libertarians should be running for office.
Right. Well, you're an agorist, right?
No, I'm not really an agorist. I was, and then now I'm kind of like a farmer.
What's the difference?
I don't know. I think it's the hair. I mean, I still have a lot of libertarian tendencies. I have a lot of agorist tendencies. I have a lot of anarchist tendencies. I also have some conservative tendencies. I'm kind of like, this is where I run into.
You're Tommy Salmons.
Exactly. I run into this issue with this whole labeling thing. People want to like paint you into this like one-dimensional like corner, and it's like, no, I think about these things and I wonder and I'm curious and I ask questions and I argue with myself, and I'm not even sure I'm right half the time, because like, I don't know, man. I don't think libertarians should be running for office. I think libertarians could be doing better things in better ways. And I just worry about getting this label of ripping people off, because when you run as a libertarian, you're not going to win. Maybe some local elections you'll win some stuff, but when you run nationally, you're accepting big money, big donors, a lot of time, a lot of effort. I just worry, like, is it bad for the label? Is it immoral? Is there a problem morally with doing it, knowing that the best you're going to do is 3% of the vote or 5% of the vote?
Well, I mean, do the donors have the expectation that you'll win? I
see, and that's what the problem is. I think some of them do. I think some of them are delusional enough to think we could do it this time with this guy. Somehow, some way. If this works out and we could get him on stage and we could do this, then this could happen. And I'm not convinced. I'm not convinced that everybody is as open-eyed about it as you and I might be. Like, I would happily give money to Dave Smith to run a campaign because I know Dave Smith would do good things. But I would also do it knowing that Dave Smith's not going to win the election.
Right.
Right. It's not because I wouldn't be donating to Dave Smith, the potential president. I would be donating to Dave Smith, the educator.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, if we're talking about solely presidential, I don't think does anyone really donate to a Libertarian Party candidate thinking that they will win or have any chance of winning?
Dude, I've seen some people say some things and I'm like, y'all don't understand politics.
Well, I guess I wouldn't put it past some people, but and this is true. And one thing, I guess what I appreciate about you then is that you're Tommy Salmons. I mean, that's who the fuck you are. You're not Tommy Salmons, the libertarian.
Right.
And I think that I'm Patrick MacFarlane, and I work with you at the Libertarian Institute, and I embrace that term because it's a tradition I think that needs to be fronted by people like us who are good caretakers of it, and make sure that that's what that term fucking means, you know. But I don't have a problem with the term libertarian when I'm talking to like you or Scott or Pete or people I know, right? Yeah. I have a problem with the term whenever I'm talking to somebody that has no idea what a libertarian is. It's because it's always a straw man. So it's like, all right,
And yeah, I'm Tommy Salmons, and I've always said this. I always say, like, look, no one person is a label, an ideology, their best moment, or their worst mistake. You're a combination of all these things, and that's what makes you a human being. And we got to quit thinking about people in these boxes, in this one dimension of being either their worst mistake or their best moment, or, you know, their ideology or some word they said, whatever it may be. Like, that's just not the way to view people. When you're falling into a trap of dehumanizing the person that you're addressing whenever you do that. And so if you just say, well, you're just a progressive. Well, no, they're not just a progressive.
Right.
They're a person that happens to adhere to progressive ideals. So like the personing of somebody, I think this is why I talk to people the way I do, and I engage the way I do, is because I always look at somebody as a person first. And it's like, I'm just going to treat you the way I want to be treated, you know?
Yeah. And I've been trying not to, because I think that's good. I don't think every person thinks about it that way as thoughtfully as you do, because it's like, I think libertarians fall into this a lot. And especially, I mean, I'm pointing right at myself because I did this for years. Libertarianism is my identity. It's what I'm about. It's who I am, is I'm a libertarian, you know? And I think there are a lot of people who are progressives and, you know, maybe conservatives who feel that way too. But this is why I don't talk about strategy or culture too much on my show, because at the end of the day, I'm fucking Patrick MacFarlane. You know, I like the stuff I like, but moreover, you know, I like the stuff I like. I have these values. I have my family. I have those things. After years of being Mr. Libertarian, that being my identity, I've finally found a place where I can just be myself. And I see these things, right? But when it comes to culture and shit, I know who I am. And I can't control what other people do, and I can't control what they think or what strategy they're going to take. And I don't want to, man. I want to call out stupid shit or shit that I disagree with when I see it. But it's like, what I come back to is that people just got to do what they think is best for themselves, and what they think is best going to, you know, promote these ideas and liberty itself.
I think there's got to be a place for people that are socially conservative to form their tribes, and they have the right to form their tribes.
Yeah.
You know,
I agree.
Like, you know, the history of the United States just as well as I do, if not better. You know, back in the day, I mean, the towns and the provinces, they were all separated by religion. Like, you didn't have Catholics living with Protestants and this, that, and the other.
Yeah.
And I actually don't see anything wrong with that. If people want to segregate themselves in that way, I'm not talking about forced segregation. You know, it's like Murray Rothbard said, forced integration is just as bad as forced segregation.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you don't want to, and see, the progressives are all about forced integration. All about that. And that bothers me. Yeah. And if the conservatives were preaching forced segregation, I would have just as big of a problem with them. But they're not. They're just like, look, I want to be able to form my own community and raise my own children and do my own thing, you know? And as long as they're on that page, I'm kind of on the same page as them, you know? I'm like, yeah, let them do their own thing. Let them have their own communities. Like, what's wrong with that? Nothing.
And Jeff Dice talked about this. Remember his blood and soil speech? It got known as, because it caused a big stir.
Oh yeah, the Jeff Dice Nazi speech when he came out of the closet.
2018, right?
Yeah.
Where he said that blood and soil matters to people.
Yeah, I don't remember if it was 2018 or 2019, but I do remember the speech. It was a really good speech.
And I agree with it, man. It's
mainly because he talked about one of my favorite essays in that speech.
What essay is that?
That's the Orwellian essay, Politics in the English Language. I love that essay.
I think it's Jeff Deist. Universal. It's self-determination, not universalism, is the goal. I think that's the name of the speech. I know he wrote a piece with that title, and I agree with it. I mean, what is the goal here? And it goes back to what, and I think in some ways it really makes it seem like the Free State Project is really what the winner is. You know, secession, finding a small place where we can get people to move to, taking that place over and splitting off, creating, you know, an intentional community like that.
Yeah, I'm all about the intentional communities. You know, like I'm more about I think I like the idea of intentional communities. Let's put it that way. I'm more an advocate for repairing the extended family.
Yeah.
I think that's the best possible scenario. But in order to get to an extended family, you have to repair the nuclear family. You have to get to a position to where you've created, at least amongst a segment of the population, a culture that believes that divorce is wrong. And that the family is going to stay together no matter what. And then you can separate it back out. You need to get it back out. But I'm really a big fan of the extended family. I really feel like the extended family is the best possible solution.
I think I do like of course, the nuclear family unit is something I think that's been really kind of the backbone of society itself. And
well, only for about 100 years.
Has it?
Yeah. It was always like, you looked at all the immigrants that came over into America early, they were all living in extended families. And it wasn't until the Industrial Revolution where people started moving around that the extended family broke up and it became the nuclear family model.
I guess I was talking about the family unit in general. I should have been more specific.
Yeah.
I'm glad you make that distinction.
Yeah, I think there's a big distinction to be made because I think the extended family takes pressure off the parents in a nuclear family situation. Like, right. So you have aunts and uncles and grandmas and grandpas that can be trusted with the children as opposed to just the mom and dad all the time.
Yeah.
And so that allows for the mom and dad to have more of an intimate relationship where the children aren't up their ass all the time. Because one of the things I found whenever I was married the 2 times before this, I had children with my other 2 wives, not with Beatrix. We just have dogs, and that's plenty for us. But well, yeah, I had 5 kids, so I don't need any more. I got fixed. But one of the things I found was as a father in a nuclear family scenario, and this could have been my youth, you know, it's very, very well could have been my youth, but I found that I was giving my kids more attention than I was giving my wife. And that's not a good situation because I'm letting that relationship kind of wilt, right? You don't want to allow that relationship to wilt. So the nuclear family allowed the flexibility for the children to kind of be elsewhere while the parents were continuing to work on their relationship. And so I think that is ultimately the best case scenario for everybody. I don't even know if a nuclear family is a plausible solution but I think that the only way to get back to the extended family is by restoring some semblance of the nuclear family.
Yeah.
I don't think you can just make the leap back. I mean, it was a long time chiseling away and getting us to the situation we're in now, that I don't think you can just turn around and just jump back into an extended family situation.
I think one issue that you run into with the extended family, and I mean, even so, the argument goes for the nuclear family too, for that matter, but that dysfunctionality is harder to escape from if there's such an emphasis on the extended family. You know, if your extended family is a bunch of pedos, what do you do about that? Or if your nuclear family is a bunch of pedos.
Yeah, but I mean,
but that doesn't destroy the concept.
Yeah, I have a,
because that's the progressive mindset. I think, you know, like if
well, no, the progressive mindset is the state is your family.
Oh, right, but what I've no. But the way
no, they're not.
no. The way I've heard it articulated, though, is that, and this goes back to the whole like transgenders in school type thing, you know,
okay,
is that, of course, in effect, it's towards the state, right? Because the state is the refuge from a family that is dysfunctional, right? In the progressive mindset. So if you are a gay child and your parents don't accept your gayness, you can run to a public teacher, i.e. the state, to get away from your nuclear family.
Right. But I mean, they're making an argument that has been disproven by every other nation in the world. Because every other nation lives in an extended family situation. So are they trying to say that, or are they trying to exert American exceptionalism?
I guess I don't know if they're arguing per se against a resurgence of the nuclear family. Like so progressives, I haven't seen them consciously try to denigrate the nuclear family or the extended family.
Oh, I have. On the BLM website, it says they wanted to destroy the nuclear family.
Oh, really?
Yeah. That was one of their goals.
I mean, of course, that doesn't make sense to me, that from their perspective.
Yeah.
You know, like,
yeah,
why,
like single motherhood isn't bad enough in the black community.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And part of and a lot of people, a lot of psychologists, I've heard a lot of psychologists say that the part of the aggressiveness that you get out of the men coming out of these impoverished black communities is due to single motherhood, because the single mother acting as both the father and the mother tends to be very abusive. Mm-hmm. And so you're creating a situation into which the child becomes very aggressive. Especially towards women, because a woman has been abusing him all his life.
Right.
You know?
Well, and you think about all the Great Society stuff, you know, and how drugs have destroyed African American culture.
Mm.
Yeah, well, man, I should get going.
Yeah, we've been going for a while.
This has been a great conversation, dude.
This has been fun.
Yeah.
That's what I'm just going to call it, a conversation with Patrick.
Well, these are things I've been wanting to take apart, you know, really kind of get down to, because I've been thinking about this stuff a lot lately.
Yeah.
I know you have too. So.
Yeah. We definitely got to expand on this conversation, though.
Yeah, for sure. Well, libertyweekly.net is where you can find me. Fucking Libertarian Institute for both of us.
Yep. All right, man. Well, I'll make sure I put I'll put some your shit in the show notes.
Hell yeah.
I'm gonna go eat.
Sounds good, dude.
I haven't eaten yet. The wife was cooking when I got on.
Mine made beef stroganoff.
I think we're having anchovy pasta, I think is what she made.
Oh, interesting.
Yes, she makes.
Is she gonna bring biltong to Childerberg or?
Yes, I'm going to make sure she makes some biltong. Actually, there's supposed to be a biltong off. Her and Eric are supposed to have some kind of contest, so I don't know what's going on with that. But.
Well, I'm really looking forward to it, man. Looking forward to seeing you guys.
Yeah, you too, man. You have a good night.
Yeah, you too. Peace.
All right, bye.
If you're gonna play, scam, pick and choose, well, it's a game that was made for you to lose. It doesn't really matter how many times, it's the same old worn out story, same old lines. They're all pointing dirty fingers in hypocrisy, bragging on their feats of mediocrity again. Never really making any kind of change, but they keep on getting re-elected, and I find that strange. And that's why I say fuck them, don't feed them, cause we don't even need them. I never celebrate the tyrants out of taking our freedoms. Yeah, I said fuck them, don't feed them, cause we don't even need them. I never celebrate the tyrants out of taking our freedoms. What's it gonna take for you to see that we're living in a rigged democracy? People stand in line for the thieves that they've been choosing, paying no attention to the rights they keep on losing. But they all gather in the rallies and they chant their names on goddamn well that it's all gonna be the same. Just 4 more years of war and taxes, 4 more years of them grinding down their axes. And that's why I say fuck them, don't feed them, cause we don't even need them. I never celebrate the tyrants that are taking our freedoms. Yeah, fuck them, don't feed them, cause we don't even need them. I never celebrate the tyrants that are taking our freedoms.